Good morning, students. Hope you all are fit and fine at your home. Dear children, we all keep our doors and windows open just to have fresh air and sunlight inside our houses. But in today's story, the window has a different secret behind it. You want to know? Okay, let's start with today's session from your book English Rose, The Open Window, written by H. Munro. This is a story of a man called Frampton Nuttall. He suffered from nervousness and so he wanted to get himself treated. Now Frampton's sister told him to go to village and told him to meet one Mrs. Sappleton who treated his nervousness problem. He went to their house. He met a girl, actually a 15 years old girl named Vera. There was an open window in that house about which Vera told Frampton how. What did she tell him? And then something happened which made Frampton so nervous that he rushed out of the gate completely scared. What was he scared of? Did he see a ghost? Or was he scared of the dog which they had? Let's know the story completely in this session. So today I am going to read and explain the story to you. Then we will do comprehension check and the other question answers related to this chapter. But before starting, about the author first. Hector Hughes Munro, also known by his pen name Saki, he was born on 18 October 1870 in Myanmar, Burma. He was a British author and playwright. He was master of the short stories and often compared to O. Henry and Dorothy Parker. He was pen named Saki because he was the cupbearer in the Rubaiyat of Umar Khayyam. He died on 14 November 1926 in France at the age of 45. Now, reading of the chapter with explanation. My aunt will be down presently, Mr. Nuttall said a very self possessed young lady of 15. Self possessed means calm and composed. In the meantime, you must try and put up with me. Put up means stay. Frampton Nuttall endeavored means tried, to say the correct something which should duly flatter the niece. Flatter means make her happy. Of the moment without unduly discounting the aunt that was to come. Unduly means more than necessary. Privately, he doubted more than ever whether these formal visits on a succession of total strangers would do much towards helping the nerve cure which he was supposed to be undergoing. Explanation. Frampton Nuttall was sitting in Mr. Sappleton's house. Mrs. Sappleton was busy, and so her niece, a 15-year-old girl, was sitting with Frampton and talking. Frampton tried to say something which would impress the niece right at the moment, and also he had thought of speaking some good words for her aunt, also, who hasn't yet come out of the room. But individually or personally, he doubted whether these kind of visits to the total strangers, because Sepleton's family was strange to him, so he doubted that will it ever cure his nerve problem which he was supposed to be getting treated. Please turn the page, students. I know how it will be, his sister had said when he was preparing to migrate to this rural retreat. You will bury yourself down there and not speak to a living soul, and your nerves will be worse than ever from moping. Migrate means shift, and retreat means withdraw or escape. Mopping means being unhappy. I shall just give you letters of introduction to all the people I know there. Some of them, as far as I can remember, were quite nice. Frampton wondered whether Mrs. Sepleton, the lady to whom he was presenting one of the letters of introduction, came into the nice division. Do you know many of the people round here? Asked the niece, when she judged that they had sufficient silent communion. Communion means here communication, or we can say mental connection. Hardly a soul, said Frampton. My sister was staying here at the rectory. Rectory means this is a place, or we can say house, of a senior church official. You know, some 4 years ago, and she gave me letters of introduction to some of the people here. He made the last statement in a tone of distinct regret. Regret means feel sorry about something. Now, explanation. When Frampton had decided to shift to a village for his treatment, his sister knew that Frampton was a very shy person and he will never approach anyone personally. So she told him that she will give him some letters of introduction, and he can give those letters to the people who she knew there in the village, and she told that some of the people were very nice and it will definitely benefit from it. So Frampton wondered whether Mrs. Sepleton also feel in that category of nice people, who the sister knew after a long silence between the niece and Frampton. The niece asked him if he knew people around the village, and that time Frampton told her that his sister was staying there 4 years ago and she had given him some letters of introduction for the people whom she knew. But this last statement was in a tone of regret, or felt sorry, because Frampton was basically a very shy and introvert person and he never liked interacting with strangers around him. Come to the book. Then you know practically nothing about my aunt, pursued the self possessed young lady. Only her name and address, admitted the caller. Caller means speaker, or here we can say Frampton Nuttall. He was wondering whether Mrs. Sappleton was in the married or widowed state. Widow means a lady whose husband is died. An undefinable something about the room seemed to suggest masculine habitation. Suggest masculine habitation means suggest that the room belongs to a man. Her great tragedy happened just 3 years ago, said the child. That would be since your sister's time. Her tragedy? Asked Frampton. Somehow, in this restful country, spot tragedies seems out of place. Please turn the page. You may wonder why we keep that window wide open on an October afternoon, said the niece, indicating a large French window that opened onto a lawn. Now, explanation. Frampton told the niece that he did not know anything about Mrs. Sappleton except her name and address. He didn't even know that she was married or a widow. But when he looked at that room, it was clear to him that his room belongs to a man. And how the niece started to tell about a tragedy, a mishappening, or a bad incident which happened about 3 years ago. The niece wanted Frampton to guess why they had kept a big French window open on an October afternoon. Come to the book. It is quite warm for the time of the year, said Frampton, but has that window got anything to do with the tragedy? Out through the window 3 years ago to a day, her husband and her two young brothers went off for their day's shooting. They never came back. In crossing the moor, moor is grassland, to their favorite snipe shooting ground, they were all three engulfed. Engulfed means buried in a treacherous piece of bog. Treacherous means dangerous. Bog means wet or spongy ground. It had been the dreadful wet summer. Dreadful means terrible, you know, and places that were safe in other years gave way suddenly without warning. Their bodies were not recovered. That was the dreadful part of it. Here the child's voice lost its self possessed note and became faltering human. Faltering means a faltering voice is shaky, hesitant, or we can say with pauses. Now, explanation. Of course, Frampton did not understand that in quite hot October month, why should anybody keep that window open? And then the niece started to explain why it was open, and she told that about 3 years ago, on the same day, Mrs. Sappleton's husband and her two young brothers had gone for a day's shooting, but they never came back. And when they were crossing a patch of grass to their favorite shooting ground, they were buried in the terrible bog. And since they could not escape, they were not saved, so it is believed that probably they were dead because their bodies were never recovered. And that was the most terrible part of this tragedy. While telling this story, Niece had lost her calm and composed voice, and her voice started to shake because of the emotions that she was undergoing. Now, come to the book. Poor aunt always think that they will come back someday. They and the little brown spaniel. Spaniel is a breed of dog that was lost with them and walk in at that window just as they used to do. That is why the window is kept open every evening till it is quite dusk. Dusk means dark in evening. Poor dear aunt, she has often told me how they went out. Her husband, with his white waterproof coat over his arm, and Ronnie, her youngest brother, singing, Bertie, why do you bound? As he always did to tease her because she said it caught on her nerves. Caught on her nerves. It is an idiom and it means irritated her. Do you know, sometimes on still quiet evenings like this, I almost get a creepy feeling. Creepy means a strange or scary feeling that they will all walk in through the window. Now, explanation. The niece added that her poor aunt always expect that someday her husband and her two young brothers and their dog will walk in through the same window, and that is why the window was kept open every evening till it was quite dark. An aunt had told her how they had gone out. For example, her husband, while going out, had a white waterproof coat over his arms, and her youngest brother, Ronnie, used to sing a particular song which always irritated her, and to sing this and sorry and to this the niece also added that whenever she sits in that room on quiet evenings like this one, she always get that scary feeling that big lawn walk through that window. Now come to the book, students. She broke off with a little shudder. Broke off means started to cry. Shudder means shiver. It was a relief to Frampton when the aunt bustled into the room. Bustle means entered. Bustle means a different type of entry means entered noisily into the room with a whirl of apologies. Whirl of apologies means many apologies for being late in making her appearance. I hope Vera has been amusing you, she said. Amusing means entertaining. She has been very interesting, said Frampton. I hope you don't mind the open window, said Mrs. Sableton briskly. Briskly means quickly. My husband and brothers will be home directly from shooting, and they always come in this way. They have been out for snipe. A snipe is a type of water bird that lives in marshes. Marshes means wet area uh, near the rivers or grasslands in the marshes today, so they will make a fine mess over my poor carpets. Mess means unclean or dirty. So, like you, Manfox, isn't it? She rattled on cheerfully about the shooting. Rattled on means went on. Shooting and the scarcity of birds and the prospects for duck in the winter. To Frampton, it was all purely horrible. Now, explanation. While telling the tragic story, the niece started to cry, but Frampton felt a bit of relief when Mrs. Sappleton entered the room with lot of apologies to Mr. Frampton. Then she introduces her niece, whose name was Vera, to whom Frampton had been talking. Mrs. Sappleton also told him that her husband and brothers had gone for shooting, from where they will come directly through that window because they had gone out to shoot birds in the marshes, and therefore when they will enter they will dirty her carpets. And then she went on talking cheerfully about the shooting and the scarcity of the birds, but to Frampton, when he was hearing, it sounded very horrible, and he started to feel awkward and scared. And whatever Mrs. Sappleton told about her husband and brothers were actually proving Vera story too. Now come to the book. He made a desperate but only partially successful efforts to turn the talk on a less costly topic. He was conscious that his hostess was giving him only a fragment of her attention, and her eyes were constantly straying past him to the open window and the lawn beyond. Costly means horrible, and straying means moving. It was certainly an unfortunate coincidence that he should have paid his visit on this tragic anniversary. Anniversary means the same day after a year. So, now explanation. Since Frampton was feeling really awkward and scared, he tried to change the topic from this horrible one into something else. But he also knew that his hostess, that is Mrs. Sappleton, was not paying attention to whatever he will say because she was constantly looking at that open window which was behind him, and he felt that it was just unfortunate or a very unlucky coincidence that this thing had happened 3 years back, the same day when he had come to meet Dan. Come to the book. The doctors agree in ordering me complete rest, an absence of mental excitement, and avoidance of anything in the nature of violent physical exercise, announced Frampton, who labored. Labored means done with great difficulty. So, labored under the tolerably widespread delusion. Delusion means false impression or false belief that total strangers and chance acquaintances, acquaintances means familiar people, are hungry for the least detail of one's ailments and infirmities, their cause and cure. On the matter of diet, they are not so much in agreement, he continued. Please turn the page, students. No, said Mrs. Suppleton in a voice which only replaced a yawn at the last moment. Then she suddenly brightened into alert attention, but not to what Frampton was saying. Here they are at last, she cried, just in time for tea, and don't they look as if they were muddy up to the eyes? Explanation. Frampton now started to feel sorry. The Frampton now started to tell about his sickness, and he told that the doctor had told him to take complete rest and stay away from any kind of mental or physical strain, or we can say stress. There Frampton told because he was under the impression that strangers or familiar people always are curious to know even that smallest detail of anyone's sickness or weakness, what causes it and what is the cure in it. So Frampton was feeling very difficult to talk about all this, and at the end, when he said that on the matter of diet, none of the doctors agreed because they all told him to take different diets. At that point of time, Mrs. Sappleton was not actually interested in whatever Frampton was talking, and just at that moment, Mrs. Sappleton saw her husband and her brothers outside in the lawn. They had just come. Please come to the book. Frampton shivered slightly and turned towards the niece with a look intended to convey sympathetic comprehension. Sympathetic comprehension means understanding and showing sympathy. The child was staring out through the open window with a dazed horror in her eyes. In a chill shock of nameless fear, Frampton swung around his seat. Swung means moved, and looked at the same direction. In the deepening twilight, twilight means half light or half darkness, three figures were walking across the lawn towards the window. They all carried guns under their arms, and one of them was additionally burdened with a white coat hung over his shoulders. A tired brown spaniel kept close at their heels. Kept close at their heels. It is an idiom and means to keep up with the speed. Noiselessly they neared the house, and then a hoarse young voice chanted out of the dusk. Hoarse means a rough voice. Chanted out of the dusk. I said, Bertie, why do you bound? Explanation. When Frampton heard Mrs. Sappleton's that they had come, Frampton started to shiver. He looked at the niece, who was also actually staring at the open window in a horror or in a scared expression. And then there was a shock of fear in Frampton also. And he moved from his seat and looked out of the window. He saw that it was dark and there were three people who were walking across the lawn. They had guns in their arms, and one of them was carrying a white coat over his shoulders. There was a brown dog who was also walking with them, and they came near the house. A rough voice started to sing that same song which Mrs. Sappleton used to get irritated with. In other words, Frampton had been the same scene that Vera had told him. We can say the Frampton had been seeing that same scene that Vera had told him. About what? About the way these people had gone and will come back. Now come to the book. Frampton grabbed wildly at his stick and hat. The hall door, the gravel drive, and the front gate were dimly noted stages in his headlong retreat. A cyclist coming along the road had to run into the hedge to avoid imminent collision. Imminent means about to happen. Here we are, my dears, said the bearer of the white mackintosh. Mackintosh means a full length waterproof coat. Coming in through the window, fairly muddy, but most of it's dry. Who was that who bolted out as we came up? Bolted out means went out, or you can say hurried out. A most extraordinary man, a Mr. Nuttall, said Mrs. Sappleton, could only talk about his illness and dashed off without word of goodbye or apology when you arrived. One would think he had seen a ghost. Explanation. On seeing that scene, Frampton was so scared and nervous that he did not want to stay there evermore many longer, so he quickly grabbed his stick and hat. He rushed out of the hall door and sandy path of the garden, the front gate, so quickly that when he came on the road, he was just about to crash or have an accident with a cyclist, and then to avoid that accident, that cyclist had turned towards the hedge on the other hand inside the house. Mr. Sappleton asked Mrs. Sappleton who was that person who rushed out so eagerly, and then Mrs. Sappleton told him that he was Mr. Nuttall, who was the extraordinary person who was talking about his illness, and then suddenly, without a word of goodbye or apology, he left as he had seen a ghost. Come to the book, students. This is the last passage. We are about to complete our story. I expect it was the spaniel, said the niece calmly. He told me he had a horror of dogs. Horror of dogs means scared of dogs. He was once hunted into a cemetery. Cemetery means graveyard, somewhere on the banks of the Ganges by a pack of pariah dogs. Pariah dog means someone who others keep away from. So these kinds of dogs, and had to spend the night in a newly dug grave with the creatures snarling and grinning and foaming just above him. So these snarling, grinning and foaming are the sounds of dogs to make someone scared. Enough to make anyone lose their nerves. Lose their nerve, it is also an idiom, and the meaning is become frightened. Romance at the short notice was her specialty. Romance means mystery, excitement, or we can say adventure. Now, explanation. Now, at the end, Farah tries to give a reason why Frampton behaved like this, and she told everyone that it was probably because of dog that he reacted like this. But here she tells a lie to everyone that Frampton had told her that he was scared of dogs, and once it happened, a few dogs had chased him into a graveyard, and to escape from the dogs, he had hid in a newly dug grave, and those dogs were giving him ferocious expression from above the grave. This had made him very frightened at the time, and she says that if ever it was anyone else, even that person would have become frightened. Now, this last line, romance at the short notice, was her specialty, means that Vera had a very special ability to explain a strange or an unnatural event such a way that it became very interesting. It looks like a real story. So now the story is over. I hope you enjoy the story and also you understood the story. I'll give you question answers in the PDF format. Till then, read your chapter carefully, and after that, complete your work in your notebook in a fair handwriting. Thank you.